Michael Lacey and James Larkin built a newspaper empire.
Devoted to exposing corruption in politics and exposing things where business and government were colluding.
When the newspaper industry collapsed, they launched a new venture that inadvertently changed the sex work industry, turning them into villains in a new moral crusade.
Backpage.com is nothing more than a front for pimps and child sex traffickers.
There are more slaves in the world today than ever before in human history.
It is a crime that is rightly punishable by incarceration in prison.
This is about people creating careers, building names for themselves.
Piss in my mouth, but don't tell me it's raining. Criminalize the industry, throw us in jail, but don't tell me you're trying to save us and make it better.
It was a McCain production. You know, that committee is the progeny of the House Un-American Activities Committee, Joe McCarthy's committee in the 50s.
Coming up, how the crackdown on one website turned back the clock on the sex work industry and had profound consequences for free speech on the internet.
It would give the lie to our entire lives, our entire career of being journalists. If the government could come in and put their stubby little fingers in our chest and make us ask for our mommy, it ain't gonna happen.
Federal agents raiding the home belonging to one of Backpage's co-founders.
Federal investigators were on scene, their vehicles lining the highway here behind me.
On April 6, 2018, the FBI raided the homes of Backpage.com founders Michael Lacey and James Larkin. They were accused of running a website that facilitated prostitution. Reports hailed their arrest and indictment as a major victory in the battle against modern sexual slavery on the internet. So, who are these two men, and how did they end up as defendants in the biggest prostitution trial in the last decade? Michael Lacey and James Larkin met almost 50 years ago in Tempe, Arizona.
Michael Lacey was a student at Arizona State University, and him and some other students there founded this paper, The New Times, in 1970.
Journalist Elizabeth Nolan Brown writes about sex workers and the criminal justice system, and she's been covering the lawsuit against Backpage.
And it was an anti-war paper. It was a response to the shootings at Kent State and various other sort of student activism happening at the time. James Larkin came on about a year or so later.
Morons with typewriters. We had no goddamn idea what we were doing. None of us had ever put out a newspaper or taken any journalism class. We were like a number of 20-year-olds full of confidence because we didn't know any better.
New Times was focused on the reader, wasn't focused on the power structure, wasn't pandering to anyone, but basically was pandering to the readership in terms of interesting stories, attitudes that were not right-wing and not left-wing, but kind of unusually anachronistic.
By 1972, the two had dropped out of college and started an alternative newspaper, New Times Weekly, which eventually became Phoenix New Times. Over the years, they focused their voice on challenging established interests.
An anti-authoritarian attitude, but not just needlessly so. I mean, they were sort of devoted to exposing corruption in politics and exposing things where business and government were colluding, but also with a sort of playful attitude, too.
That led to battles with powerful people in Arizona like John McCain.
We had an immediate issue with McCain.
Everything to this guy was communist. Do you remember that?
Right, I do. McCain was a very strong Contra supporter.
McCain was a new politician at the time who had married his wife Cindy there.
Cindy McCain's dad is part of a sort of wealthy liquor baron family there, so their whole family and his connections had been targets of New Time for a long time.
Then there was the notorious Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who was later convicted of being in contempt of court over locking up immigrants who didn't have a legal status.
We went after what happened to prisoners once they went into the jail. There was a higher incident of violence and casualty and sickness and death. We also wrote about his racism and his campaign against people with brown skin.
They were just really, over the years, developing a lot of enemies from these people in power, and that extended beyond Arizona as they moved into other cities and started doing journalism through their papers there.
Their willingness to take on powerful interests meant that they were constantly getting sued or suing other people over access. Because the paper was immensely profitable, their legal bills became just a cost of doing business. Revenues derived almost exclusively from classified ads.
Classified ads, usually took up the back pages and pages of these free weekly newspapers. Obviously, you'd have things like help wanted, job ads, and for rent. The personals were a huge part of Backpage ads. And then also there were adult ads, escort ads, phone sex line ads, strip club reviews, and all of that.
The model that we kind of tinkered with started in Greenwich Village. Going back to 1955 with the Village Voice, okay? They started with classifieds, with adult ads, with stripper ads, all kinds of ads in the back of the book. Totally legal, always have been legal. It's not a Johnny-come-lately business. So all through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, all of our papers carried adult.
And those are things that sustain not just the Phoenix New Times and the papers that Lacey and Larkin own, but all of these alt weeklies across the country for so long.
Meanwhile, Lacey and Larkin's newspaper business was extremely lucrative.
So by the 80s and especially the 90s, they were able to start buying up these alt weeklies that were failing in other cities. And by the early 2000s, they had more than a dozen different papers in different cities, including Los Angeles and Miami and Dallas.
And then a new player entered the classified game with the potential to bring down Lacey and Larkin's alt weekly empire. In 1995, a computer programmer in San Francisco started publishing a classified listing service on a communication platform that was just starting to get mainstream attention.
An online network called Internet.
People started asking me if I could put jobs there, stuff for sale, and it just wound up growing in a way out of control.
Craigslist could help you find everything from an apartment to furniture to a date in their personal section. It was everywhere, and it was serving everyone.
Craigslist destroyed the daily and the weekly newspaper business.
We do get fanatics, crazy people, and crooks sometimes, and that's true of everywhere on the net and in normal everyday life.
By the early 2000s, it had bitten into the revenues of almost every newspaper in America.
We start to feel it in San Francisco in about 98, 99, and we decided we'd better do something about it. So in 2004, we launched Backpage.com, which was the descendant of our back page of our newspapers. All of our newspapers had a back page that was called Backpage.
There were different sections, just like in the print, for jobs and gigs and community flyers and people selling things. And then there was an adult ad section, strippers and for escorts and for phone sex things and all sorts of sex work and adult entertainment that is legal.
Illegal activity wasn't allowed according to Backpage's terms of service.
From the beginning, they had filters and monitors that checked for things on their site to make sure that people weren't abusing the practice.
But sex workers forged their own way, just as they had in the alt weekly classifieds through innuendo.
High-tech call girls choose their words carefully to send the message without overstepping legal bounds.
Most people would probably say that I'm a prostitute, or they might call me a high-class escort. As more of the sex industry moves to the internet and possibly away from people's lives so that they're not bothered by brothels or street prostitution, you'll see less of an interest in it as far as law enforcement goes.
Backpage allowed Lacey and Larkin to keep publishing as other papers went under. In 2005, they acquired the original alt weekly, The Village Voice, which had set the standard for fearless reporting on the misdeeds of the powerful. With its classified revenues decimated, the paper was in danger of folding. Lacey and Larkin saw an opportunity to integrate what was left into Backpage.
We wanted everything. This is what we did for a living. We were weekly journalists who told magazine-style stories. And in my humble opinion, did it better than anybody else.
And then they started making partnerships with other people, and it started really expanding, and then, eventually ended up expanding across the world.
I've rescued over 10,000 American children from prostitution. I have seen the underbelly of the sexual exploitation of children and babies for over 40 years. Nothing surprises me anymore.
Lois Lee is the founder and director of Children of the Night, a program that helps underage sex workers looking for a way out.
The motorist on fabled Sunset Boulevard will find most Hollywood intersections equipped with a traffic light and a prostitute.
She started her outreach efforts in Hollywood in the late 1970s, outside of motels, at pickup spots, on the classified pages of alt weeklies, and at dime a dance clubs.
We chummied up to the owners and they'd let us talk to the girls. We're all controlled by pimps. So I've been part of that underworld. I know the players. They know me. I'm well respected.
The crack epidemic and subsequent drug war of the late 1980s and early 1990s made working the street more dangerous.
I had street teams and we wore bulletproof vests, and I finally closed those street teams in 1990 because there was just too many shootings. I was really more concerned about picking up a stray bullet because we were riding up and finding dead bodies in the street, and we'd be like right next to the police when this was being discovered. So the street activity started to disappear. Then the internet came. On the streets, you'd get $40 and you're going to get raped, robbed, and beaten up. On the internet, you would meet a doctor or a lawyer or a movie star or a singer, and you would get $300 for the same sex, and you were safer.
Let's see. Well, don't send your daughters to college. They'll learn about feminism and labor rights, and then they'll become whores, which is what happened to me.
Susie Q graduated from a liberal arts college right after the 2008 financial crisis.
And the 2008 job market was not great for my Bachelor of Arts degree. And I was working a retail job. I was hungry in San Francisco in 2008. Was not making ends meet.
In college, she had been assigned Real Live Nude Girl by Dr. Carol Queen, a writer and activist in the sex-positive feminist movement. The book was partly set at San Francisco's Leslie Lady Theater.
And I knew that that peep show that I had read about in college was just up the hill. It was my first job in the adult industry. I loved it. I was immediately on the board of directors as the theater coordinator, so I was doing activism. I was running a business, and I was also dancing naked for money, and I've just never stopped.
Susie Q was a part of a new generation of sex workers entering an industry transformed by the internet.
Well, eventually, strip club money was cool and all, but cost of living was just continuing to skyrocket. And I started doing other types of sex work, erotic massage, domination, and of course, my Red Book was integral to that.
By eliminating the need for pimps as middlemen, the internet empowered sex workers on a whole new level.
So I could ask for a reference or ask for, it was just starting up at the time, but LinkedIn profiles. Can you verify that you are who you say you are? There was also a section of the website called My Pink Book that was for workers only. So everything from, hey, I don't want my massage table anymore. It's like a pre-Facebook marketplace for hoes. Or, oh my God, this guy robbed me. Here's his photo, put him on your blacklist. These informal ways of sharing information, building community, were ways that we kept safe.
In 2000, President Bill Clinton signed the Victims of Trafficking and Violence Protection Act, which defined sex trafficking and made it a federal crime.
Under federal law, in order for something to be sex trafficking, there has to be an element of force, fraud, or coercion involved, or someone has to be underage.
President George W. Bush picked up where Clinton left off, directing money to anti-prostitution groups.
Both Christian groups and sort of feminist groups that are handling the issue, mostly Christian groups, but you've started to see all prostitution is being described as sex trafficking or human trafficking. And at that time, they start these giant stings that mostly rely on Craigslist and later Backpage. And this really starts picking up under Obama. The FBI funding these task forces with local sheriffs and giving them money sort of contingent on the fact that they frame these as sex trafficking stings instead of prostitution stings. And they're really combining to make it look like there's a huge epidemic and this huge problem that needs to be addressed.
There was also Operation Cross Country, a federal law enforcement initiative to stop sex trafficking that's been running for more than a decade. Most of those arrested were consenting adult sex workers and their customers.
Then juveniles that they do find, which are, almost all older teenagers, 16 and 17, they often end up arresting them. And they do offer them some sorts of services usually, but it's conditioned on them testifying against someone and claiming and naming a trafficker that they can go after instead. Then they just take the people and take them back to wherever they came from, if that was foster care or, a state home or their parents' house or wherever. A lot of times they're, already people who are in troubled situations and So they're, running away from those and trading sex just sort of to get by on their own.
By 2010, anti-sex work activists began to sharpen their messaging.
I am very much engaged in stopping the purchasing of illegal sex, sexual exploitation, and I do it by being an activist.
A Texas oil heiress named Swanee Hunt founded Demand Abolition, a nonprofit dedicated to destroying the illegal sex trade.
Except that prostitution between consenting adults doesn't really make that many people angry anymore in the United States.
In 2010, Hunt's group commissioned a report that suggested rebranding prostitution as sexual slavery, because doing so might garner more support and less resistance.
Moving the goalpost is a really good way to describe it.
The sex slavery trafficking business today.
This sexual enslavement going on.
Lost children trapped into sex slavery.
In 2010, a coalition of state attorneys general went after Craigslist.
Anyone looking for adult services on Craigslist will have to go elsewhere.
The company shut down that section.
17 state attorneys general recently sent a letter to the website saying the adult services section promotes prostitution and child trafficking.
Adult ads still appeared all over the rest of Craigslist. They just usually mostly shifted into the dating site. But also a big share of the market did go over into Backpage then. And that was when the attorneys general started doing the exact same thing that they did with Craigslist to Backpage and saying, hey, you've got to take down this adult ad section.
In 2010, people began to sue Backpage's parent company, claiming they'd been trafficked on the site.
They weren't saying that Backpage knew that they were underage or even necessarily should have known, but that by virtue of them having provided this platform where it was possible for other people to have posted ads for them, then Backpage was culpable. So you had judges saying no, because there's this thing, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, passed in the 90s, and it says that web platforms shouldn't be treated as the speakers of content, which basically means websites, digital platforms, cloud services, search engines, all of that. They're not liable for every single word that users put up, and they're not treated as sort of one and the same legally with their users.
The lawsuits were dismissed on the grounds that Section 230 absolved Backpage from culpability, so anti-sex worker activists shifted their strategy.
Ashton Kutcher and Demi Moore do this Real Men Don't Buy Sex campaign.
There are more slaves in the world today than ever before in human history.
It's happening in the United States. There's between 100 and 300,000 child sex slaves in the United States today.
The number ran everywhere. It ran in the New York Times, it ran in USA Today, it was on CNN. Every damn media outlet took and accepted this without ever looking at the source material.
A cover story in the Village Voice revealed that the statistic was taken out of context.
They specifically look at this University of Pennsylvania story. That's where this 100,000, 300,000 number comes from.
They traced it back to a 2001 journal article estimating that there were 100,000 to 300,000 children deemed at risk for sexual exploitation in the US, Canada, and Mexico, not just the United States, as Kutcher and others had claimed.
That would be 6,000 underage children being sex trafficked in America's 50 largest cities. It was totally junk science.
The Voice also found out that the study's methodology was flawed because its figures weren't based on actual cases. The authors relied on guesses at who might end up a sex trafficking victim, and the data was more than 12 years out of date by the time Kutcher and others were citing it. Even the Crimes Against Children Research Center advised journalists and researchers in 2008 not to cite the study. One of the study's lead authors later said the same.
Ashton Kutcher freaks out. He has this total Twitter meltdown. He starts tweeting at the Village Voice and saying that they support child sex trafficking and, everyone should boycott them.
It's like a bar fight, and you just can't see where the next idiot is going to come from. You just know that they're coming. And it's like a bar fight that never ends.
Backpage.com is nothing more than a front for pimps and child sex traffickers.
To stop this online child sex trafficking that's being facilitated by sites such as this.
But we need to approach this as if this were your daughter or your niece or your neighbor who's being victimized by Backpage and other people like that.
They've all really simplified what is a hugely complicated issue, and they've made it into a thing where there is one website, it is permitting child sex trafficking, and Section 230 is a loophole that lets it. None of that is true, but that was sort of the narrative that got settled on around 2011 or so.
It's an evergreen political issue. Always works. Those guys they're waiting to be governors or senators, presidents. That's what that was all about.
Who could be opposed to them to take on child sex trafficking? Well, we're opposed to them. Okay? We're going to fight this. We'll talk about this.
So in 2012, Lacey and Larkin sell the papers to a group of their current executives that work for them, and they move over to exclusively running Backpage at the time.
Backpage was bombarded with lawsuits. For Lacey and Larkin, this was familiar territory.
Much like when they were fighting these battles with their papers before this, they keep winning. Because the law is on their side and they're not doing anything illegal, they are actually succeeding in court. But that changes, I guess, the more you have more and more people pile on.
In 2012, California Attorney General Kamala Harris took an interest in Backpage.
Backpage.com needs to shut itself down when it has created as its business model the profiting off the selling of human beings and the purchase of human beings.
Harris had supported anti-sex trafficking bills when she was District Attorney of San Francisco and as State Attorney General. She also served on an anti-trafficking task force in the state.
Good businesses such as Craigslist understood how it could be misused and mishandled, and they shut that aspect of their business model down. Backpage needs to do the same.
Backpage's leadership and founders all along were like, tell us what we can do to actually eradicate exploitation on our site. Tell us what we can actually do to help you, but we're not going to just take down this thing.
To better understand the issue, in 2012, Lacey and Larkin visited Children of the Night's facility and met with Lois Lee.
We spent the day because we heard about the work that Lois was doing.
A lot of the NGOs around this issue raise money to raise money to raise money, and awareness somewhere fits in there. And the problem is with that is that there's no one on the ground helping these kids. Lois fits that bill. And we were surprised to find her because we hadn't found anybody.
We've been in this building for 25 years. It's a 24-bed facility. There are 3,068 children who've lived here. They attended an on-site school. We put hundreds of kids in college. We have a multitude of things that we do from head to toe for a long period of time with kids. For instance, some are being assessed for individual educational plans because of learning disabilities, and they have to have counseling, and you got rape trauma.
Lacey and Larkin spent the day observing the program.
Here was a woman that was trying to do something about this, and we wanted to see if we could help.
And I said, well, I need money because I'm carrying $100,000 accounts payable that I've got to take care of.
Lacey and Larkin have donated nearly $1 million to Children of the Night since 2012. They also gave the organization free ad space.
The Backpage ads are split. Okay, good.
At Lee's urging, employees for Backpage trained vice cops on how to use the site to catch would-be traffickers.
Like if they see a guy take a girl into a motel, they can't necessarily go in that motel room without probable cause. But could they call Backpage to get the guy's ID and see if he's a parolee and get his credit card information, identify who he is? And they said, we would be happy to do that. The vice cops loved it, and they used it, and they called them all the time.
It was totally cooperative. We really had a good relationship with DOJ. We had a good relationship with Bob Mueller.
In 2011, then FBI Director Mueller awarded a Department of Justice certificate to Lacey and Larkin's top deputy, Backpage CEO Carl Farrar, for helping with federal sex trafficking investigations. Local law enforcement agencies also privately commended the company for its outstanding cooperation compared to other companies and for being law enforcement friendly.
They made numerous arrests, but were told by their upper echelon, the chiefs, you cannot tell anybody, and we don't want to know about it. Because you have to understand that police departments get their money from Congress. So the pressure really wasn't about police because it was a wonderful, investigative tool. It was really politics.
In 2013, 49 attorneys general petitioned Congress to amend Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act so that they could bring criminal charges against Backpage. Congress declined to pass legislation, so politicians and law enforcement began to target Backpage by any means necessary.
Today, with an overwhelming bipartisan vote, the United States House of Representatives passed the SAVE Act.
It was explicitly sold by Sponsor and Wagner and various other politicians as a way to hold Backpage accountable. It was the first attempt, though, where they were going to change Section 230.
Around this time, the site had to defend itself on another front. Cook County, Illinois Sheriff Tom Dart came up with the idea of pressuring Visa and MasterCard to stop processing payments on the site.
He decides to now tell the credit card companies that are accepting Backpage payments that they cannot do business with Backpage or he will come after them.
The company sued, and a federal judge declared Dart's actions unconstitutional. But despite the wins Backpage was racking up in court, politicians began to narrow in on the site. going after people associated with it in the most public ways possible. In 2015, a Senate subcommittee held a hearing on Backpage, but by this time, Lacey and Larkin had sold the company to Carl Farrar and weren't involved in the direct business of publishing or advertising anymore. Lawmakers demanded Farrar appear before them to answer questions and subpoenaed company documents. He didn't come to the hearing, and his attorneys told Congress he was out of the country at the time.
I am excited to stand before you here today, not only as your Attorney General, but as a proud California candidate for the United States Senate.
In October 2016, Harris joined Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton and filed criminal charges against Farrar, Lacey, and Larkin. Farrar was arrested on pimping charges, and Lacey and Larkin were charged with conspiracy to commit pimping.
She does this right before the election. And she knows she doesn't have the authority because she's already asked Congress, please, can I have the authority? And even though she doesn't have it and they don't give it to her, she arrests us anyway. And inside the courtroom, there was a jail cell. They filmed us in the jail cell and then broadcast it on the evening news.
So Harris gets to have her name in all the papers right before the election, saying that she's the one who helped take down these people that everyone for years has been characterizing as these big evil sex traffickers. It was a publicity stunt.
Lacey and Larkin spent 4 days in a Sacramento jail.
She knew that Section 230 barred her from bringing these charges, but she brought them anyway. And of course, a judge threw them right out.
So Harris filed another set of charges against the three men.
Harris was trying to say that Farrar and Lacey and Larkin, by virtue of having this site and knowing that sometimes, bad things happen there, that they were guilty. These other pimping charges later get dismissed too.
The judge did allow a separate money laundering charge to proceed, but Harris had recently been elected the new junior senator from California and was about to join the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, which had already been working on compelling Lacey, Larkin, Farrar, and other Backpage employees to testify before Congress. They did so on January 10, 2017. The day before the hearing, Backpage closed the adult personal ads section of the website. The purpose of the hearing was to determine whether Backpage staff had knowingly edited user posts, which would deprive them of legal protection under Section 230.
Did you edit any posts, or did the company edit any posts?
That'll be brought out, and we look forward to defending ourselves in court.
Mr. Larkin, don't you still exercise substantial direction and control over Backpage?
After consultation with counsel, I decline to answer your question
based on the rights provided
by the First
and Fifth Amendment.
Senators blast Backpage.com executives in a tense and emotional hearing.
To be clear, this is a crime. It is a crime that is rightly punishable by incarceration in prison.
We don't remember learning that instructions to cover up a crime are protected speech.
Do you acknowledge today, for the record, that child sex trafficking is a serious problem on Backpage?
It was just like one more moment of political drama where Claire McCaskill got to ask all these rhetorical questions.
According to Lacey and Larkin, the hearing provided an opportunity for the McCain family to get revenge for critical coverage in the New Times decades earlier.
John McCain was there, and Cindy McCain was there.
It was a McCain production. You know, that committee is the progeny of the House Un-American Activities Committee, Joe McCarthy's committee in the 50s. And that is a permanent subcommittee on investigations. And what they do is traipse people in front of them for political gain and to promote agendas that are particularly interesting or fruitful for those politicians. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
That's what it is.
Dog and pony show.
The next month, too, you have Ashton Kutcher come and get called to testify as a sex trafficking expert before Congress.
I also want to thank Elisa and Ashton. Ashton, you were better looking in the movies. Anyway.
It's a charade. It's an absolute charade. You can vilify these two guys for all of the sins in the world, and that's what's happening, you know? It's not right.
Behind these gates of this Paradise Valley community, federal agents raiding the home belonging to one of Backpage's co-founders. The feds also raiding the homes of the other co-founder.
Today, the federal government seized the website.
Backpage.com, now non-existent.
Now shut down by the feds.
I was on a plane from the UK. I'd been on a hiking trip with my son. 12 masked and armed FBI agents stormed my house, terrorized my daughter in her bedroom. And they took, as the search warrant suggested, anything of value. So cars, jewelry, Then they arrested me later that afternoon on the tarmac at the airport, so they knew where I was. They just decided they'd terrorize my family. Send a message.
Their response to our offer to surrender was to say, no, we're going to come and get them when we want them. And that's exactly the attitude that was on display when they showed up at my house. I detected some sort of movement. I looked over, and there's a guy pointing a gun at me. And I go out, and they're all heavily armed, handcuffed. My arms are behind me. They want to know if anybody else is on the property. And I said, yes, my mother-in-law is here. Where is she? And I pointed out where she was, in the shower. I said, why don't we just go down there together and I'll bring her out so that there's no additional drama. And he wouldn't do that. He said, how she's treated will depend entirely upon how she responds. She's a woman who's almost 80 years old. And an FBI agent with the gun drawn bursts through the door, and she is naked, and she asked for a towel. And the guy said, when an FBI agent tells you to do something, you do it. Anything that they could perceive as mine, they took. So they took art, they took all of my wife's jewelry. You know, they drove off my truck, they drove off my car.
Cindy McCain. Today she said, quote, Backpage has caused immeasurable suffering and pain.
Senator John McCain just tweeted, this is an important step forward in the fight against human trafficking.
Former Sheriff Joe Arpaio even went after the pair today, telling ABC 15 he's happy the federal government is taking action.
Lacey and Larkin were charged with facilitating prostitution through a federal indictment. Farrar pled guilty to conspiracy to commit prostitution and money laundering.
Farrar's plea agreement says he may be called upon to testify, and he may have information that may help the feds go after Lacey and Larkin.
They were in prison for about a week. The government didn't want to let them out on bail, but they were eventually let out on $1 million bail apiece. And now they've got these GPS trackers that they have to wear around their ankles, and they're not allowed to leave Maricopa County.
The first thing they did after they did the house seizures is they seized all our bank accounts, froze all our bank accounts. Also went after our lawyers' accounts, froze those, seized some of them. They tried to disqualify our First Amendment lawyers because they know that the First Amendment is what we stand for, what we've always stood behind, and we intend to do that in this case as well. It's a very difficult situation, and that's the way they want it. They have all the power in the world.
There was just a lot of fear, too, in the sex worker community when this happened. These are not the most high-end sex workers who maybe have a huge, backup that are posting on Backpage. This is the people who are just getting by.
Online resources for sex workers were disappearing. A bill called FOSTA, the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, had recently passed in Congress, creating an exception to Section 230, making platforms responsible for third-party content.
So now it's not just the feds who could take internet service providers to court if anyone underage uses them or if anyone uses them to facilitate forced prostitution. But now anyone can sue them in civil court for this, and all 50 state attorney general could bring criminal charges against them. FOSTA then also makes it a separate federal crime for digital platforms to facilitate prostitution, and the owner or manager or operator of some of these services can be punished up to 25 years in prison, even when it's only between consenting adults and there's no sex trafficking happening.
It had a chilling effect on sex worker resources.
Craigslist then closed its even dating section because it got worried that the dating ads might accidentally facilitate prostitution. You've had Reddit close sex worker forums where they were just talking amongst themselves. Not taken down by the government, taken down proactively by the website operators because now they're afraid to let sex workers pretty much speak about anything because they're afraid of getting in trouble for facilitating prostitution. It's these crazy unintended consequences that, again, make people in the sex trade less safe.
Without the ability to have simple, affordable access to an online platform that allows you to put space, time, and scrutiny, you are making decisions that are precarious. I've heard reports in my community of people who are, choosing to see clients that have assaulted them because money's tight, rent is real. I heard a report from a girl on social media that I followed up with that said in the days that Backpage fell, at one point she was hit up by 5 different pimps within 3 hours. The people, it's like, oh yeah, well you can't afford to post an ad. That's okay, baby, I've got clients for you. I mean, that's real life. That's what people like me are facing right now. It's not hypothetical, it's real.
Some deputies are now expecting more prostitutes on the streets.
Looking for customers in what's become a buyer's market.
You obviously have seen, I mean, just anecdotally from a lot of sex workers, that there are a lot of people who have gone back to the streets. And you also see a range of new websites popping up to try and fill this void.
The Austin Police Department's human trafficking unit is slowing down, pausing some of its investigations after the website Backpage was shut down.
So essentially, with Backpage going down, it's harder for investigators then to catch up to the crime?
Now they have to find out where it is happening next. It's that whack-a-mole thing.
I have a couple good friends who are survivors of trafficking and work in the anti-trafficking world to serve victims, work with law enforcement. And they say, you've taken our evidence away. Those ads were evidence to find victims.
It's not about the kids. It's not about the victims. This is about people creating careers, building names for themselves. And, you know, Michael Lacey and Jim Larkin are just the poster boys.
These individuals must be held accountable. These allegations must be given voice. And we have to do all that is right to make sure that we as a civil society protect always the most vulnerable among us and not take advantage of them, assuming nobody will care. These hearings have made clear we care.
So many different people put on this huge show of making them the villain in this. And at the same time, every time that you have things like providing more money directly to shelters for homeless teens or for sex trafficking victims come up for votes in these states and federal legislatures, nobody votes for it. Every time you have these things that offer direct material assistance to victims, nobody votes for it. Every time it's about more incarceration or more money for awareness and government-funded studies and task forces and stuff, they vote for that. Backpage has enabled them to keep pretending like they're fighting sex trafficking while actually doing very little.
No one cares about sex trafficking victims more than the community where they come from, and that's the sex working community. And what I'm angry about is that, you know, like, piss in my mouth, but don't tell me it's raining, right? Like, criminalize the industry, throw us in jail, but don't tell me because because you're trying to save us and make it better and make it more safe. You know, I think that's what's most insulting about this whole can of worms.
And as we embark on this campaign, I will tell you this: I am not perfect. Lord knows I am not perfect. But I will always speak with decency and moral clarity and treat all people with dignity and respect.
Backpage was providing advertisement for the sale of children, of minors. And unlike Craigslist, which said we're going to stop doing it, the people who are running Backpage basically thumbed their nose at us.
Craigslist kissed her ass. See, that's their definition of the right thing. That's what she means when she said we thumbed our nose at them. We don't think it's the government's job to be telling us what to print. It's hard to make us feel guilty. Okay?
We're not guilty.
We're not guilty. Okay, you can't talk me into it.
We didn't kowtow. We don't kowtow.
It would give the lie to our entire lives, our entire career of being journalists, if the government could come in and put their stubby little fingers in our chest and make us ask for our mommy. It ain't gonna happen.